start on time here, so we'll do that. Senator Hodges, could you lead us in the invocation, please? Number 10, is that right?
That's right. Would you bow with me, please? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for another beautiful day and all the blessings you've bestowed upon us. Particularly the opportunity to be here today to tend to the affairs of our state. Lead us and guide us in all we do. Grant us the wisdom that we need to make the decisions you would want. These things we ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. So the first bill we'll hear today is from Senator Hatchett, one of the governor's floor leaders. I think you're still the floor leader, aren't you, as of today? You know, you never know how that's going to go. But anyway, if you want to come up. From the mountains of northeast Georgia. Oh, and he's got Chester here with him too, okay. So we can present the bill, or we can also talk about why the bill is being presented. I don't care which way y'all want to do on that.
Well, let me just talk about the bill, why
Okay.
it's being presented. And this is an agency bill for the Department of Revenue, Senate Bill 141. There's something called the Council of State Taxation, or COST, and it regularly publishes a report that objectively assesses state statutes and regulations governing taxpayer access to independent appeals processes and the handling of procedural elements affecting taxpayer perceptions of fairness and efficiency. So there's a scorecard that COST puts out every 2 years. Right now, Georgia's current grade is B-. We're the number one state to do business. We're trying to improve that atmosphere, obviously. And so this legislation aims to address inefficiencies and undue burdens within the Georgia tax system that impact both taxpayers and tax preparers. And if this bill is to pass, we should have an A or an A- after. And so the purpose of this legislation, the legislation proposes to make the following taxpayer-friendly changes to the tax administration. Number 1, clarify final determination language in Georgia Code for federal income tax adjustments. And number 2, extend the appeal and protest period in Title 48 from 30 days to 45 days for tax assessments. And if these changes aren't enacted, we may be perceived as less taxpayer-friendly, and our grade could go down even further. So I'm here to answer any questions. I also have Commissioner here to answer questions as well.
All right. So were you saying that the Department of Revenue is behind other states in getting these implemented, and that's why we got a B-? I'm not sure what you're telling us.
I'm saying that the Department of Revenue has done their homework, and they're prepared, and they know what they need to do to get an A or an A- in this next scorecard.
All right. I've met with them. I'm familiar with the changes as well. But since we got the commissioner here, for the millions in the online audience, if you'll state your name and title for them here.
Sure. Chester Cook, and I'm just the deputy commissioner, so far as I know.
Yeah.
I've been promoted to commissioner.
Well, you're still the commissioner, so.
So this bill, and really what this scorecard does is look at just good tax administrative practices across the country in terms of how much time a taxpayer may have to appeal a notice and get their due process. So this simply puts it in more in line with what other jurisdictions are doing, and definitely could only be perceived as taxpayer friendly and benefits all taxpayers. In fact, if we looked at, for example, notices that we send, the primary beneficiaries of this would actually be individual income taxpayers in terms of volume wise. So it's a good bill. Part of it clarifies when we adopt, once a federal change comes in, just to make clear what has always been our position on that. So again, we think it's just a good bill, good policy, and good for taxpayers.
And if you look at the note in the folder on them, a lot of this is changing things from 30 days to 45 days, that kind of thing. So I think it's given a little bit more time that they feel like should be needed there.
Make a motion.
All right.
Before if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, there's one amendment that I've actually spoken to Senator Dolezal about, and this comes at the request of the department, and it's on lines. It's the last page.
So you're bringing amendments that you haven't informed the chairman on? Is that what you're saying?
I apologize.
Okay, we'll have to look on this and really
it was,
closely
It was a
here.
late amendment, and this is just going to make it. This might get us to an A+, you know.
Hmm.
But it's on 199 where it says this act shall become effective on July 1, 2025. Instead of a comma, just put a period and just strike the rest of that line in line 200.
Let me flip back to that. All right, I think we're ready for, first we need a motion. If somebody wants to make a motion, then we can offer an amendment.
I'll make a motion to pass, Mr. Chairman, LC 590084.
Got a second by Senator Hodges.
Offer amendment.
All right, so now anyone that wants to offer an amendment,
Offer amendment on line 199 after 2025, put a period and strike the remaining part of 199 and 200.
all right. Second by Senator Dolezal. Everybody's good with that? Legally wise, I would think they would be. So we've got an amendment on the floor now. All in favor of the amendment? Raise your hand, or aye, either one. I think it's unanimous. And then back to the underlying bill as amended. And make sure we're all working off the same LC. This is LC 590084. Yeah. So she's gonna give it a new LC, so she says I don't need to do that with a amendment on there. So, Senate Bill 141 as amended. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? You know, the Department of Revenue is kind of neutral on our stuff, and I never see comments that I think our bills are good or bad. But then I heard a rumor that Commissioner Chester here was in front of his school board in his county urging them to not opt out. So I'm assuming he liked the bill, even though they will never tell me that. I may be inferring more than I should there, but
He just thought of a couple more bills that he would like to pursue.
Might have been there in disguise, so.
well, we appreciate your work over there, and look forward to getting this on the floor and getting it onto the House.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. All right. State your bill number and your LC number, and we'll get going here. I know there was a substitute to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Senate Bill 129. It's LC 501133S. I'm joined by my legislative assistant. Most of you know Mr. Will Spencer, who will provide a little testimony as well. This bill was brought to me from some constituents, and we then added to it. And the reason why you have a substitute today is because we had some wording of how disability was defined in Georgia Code, and found that the workman's comp language, which I'll talk about in a minute, was more consistent. So what is this bill? This bill is the Georgia Supporting Those Who Sacrificed for Service Act. As we know, the men and women who served us in the armed forces, both here at home and around the world, have given all to our country. And our first responders who are in our community and states have done the very same. Today, if a veteran is 100% disabled, we give them a break on their property taxes. However, it's 100% or nothing. If someone is 95% disabled, they get nothing. In today's day and age, we like to put hopefully a higher emphasis on those that have served for us. And I want to give you just some very brief statistics as to why. The average person has 4 PTS moments in their life. That's post-traumatic stress. Most of us know that from PTSD from usually our veterans. Those are events in our lives that we all have, and hopefully we can deal with those in a way that don't get to something that's more catastrophic. For a veteran who had served more than 2 years of combat, which is pretty extraordinary in today's day and age, that number can be 125. The average first responder is 700. And first responder is defined in the Georgia Code as a law enforcement officer, firefighter, EMT, or 911 dispatcher. These jobs are very intense, both mentally and physically, and expose all those who serve in uniform, both military and first responders, to things that almost everybody else does not. Now, who does this impact? You might think, what is the size of the audience? Well, less than 1% of all Americans have served in the military. Just over 1% have ever served as first responders. So statistically, it's a very small number. Out of that number, only a small fraction of those have been either partially or fully disabled while performing those duties. And they're the ones we should be supporting the most. Housing prices are extraordinary now. They've gone up significantly in the last 5 years. We want our veterans and first responders to be here in Georgia in the communities that they love. We've lived through some of the highest inflation since the late 70s and early 80s. And this is a chance for us to give back. What this bill does, very simply, is based on the percentage that they are claimed or that they are labeled as being disabled, is the amount they have off on their property tax. If they are 100% disabled, they will not pay any property tax. But if they're 50% disabled, they'll pay half and just continue the scale up and down. It's a very simple way for us to help those, again, who have sacrificed for our safety, for our freedom, for our liberty, and been there in our greatest times of need. Because this is a home exemption, this will go on the ballot in November of 2026. You'll see at the end of the bill, you'll see the actual question that will be on the ballot. It's pretty straightforward in the bill. It outlines today what a first responder is, what we have today already for our veterans. It's very straightforward. There's also a fiscal note in your bill, and the fiscal note will pretty much say this doesn't impact state tax dollars at all. It will only be on the local level. But I want to make sure that everybody's clear how de minimis this is to a local government. Less than 1% were veterans, just over 1% were first responders, and then a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of those are the ones that will be eligible with this based on the fact that during the course of their duty, they were in some way injured or otherwise. You know, we do a lot of great stuff in this building, and I think we've made a real commitment to serving our veterans and our first responders. We have many of us that serve in both of these chambers that have served. I'm looking at my good friend, Senator Sean Still, right here, who served, and we have many others. And I brought with me today, though, my legislative assistant, Administrator Will Spencer, who served as a Marine, and I'm going to let him just talk for a moment to tell how personal this is to him and what it means to also to his brothers and sisters who have served alongside him.
Chairman, committee members, I cannot express to you enough the genuineness of this language and the hope that it fills in me. As a veteran, but not only as a veteran, as a recent home owner, or at least a mortgage payer, I should say, this bill absolutely applies to me. For that matter, it was a daunting thing to see the amount of costs that were going to incur on me, you know, in terms of getting a home and going through that process. I'm certainly going against the grain with my generation, and it's not an easy process. So as somebody who is a veteran, as somebody who has served, the language in this bill does make me, it does make me happy. But not only that, I've actually reached out to some of my fellow individuals who are still in the Marine Corps in this case for me. And they're asking me, because it's a daunting transition to go from being in the military to moving into the civilian realm. It's a totally different lifestyle. A lot of people don't really understand that. And one of the biggest concerns that these individuals have is, where do I live? And how do I live? How will I live? What conditions will I be living in? This bill and its language would bring in a demographic into Georgia that would only increase the state's net worth in terms of value. These individuals are service-driven, and those individuals will absolutely take that service-driven lifestyle into their communities, and the communities will be better for it. And that's really all I want to say about this bill. I'm very excited to be sitting next to the senator with this existing language as is.
Thank you, Will, and I'm glad to see Senator Redd, another distinguished veteran here on the committee. I know this will be very meaningful to him too as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I would turn it back to you in the committee to answer any questions on this bill.
All right. I was trying to do a check on the numbers because the 1% didn't seem like a realistic number, and I think that's the currently serving people.
That's the number that I got from research. It may have been wrong.
Because I was just looking up and it says there's 22 million, a population of 335 million, which would be 6.5%, but it also said there's less than 1% currently serving, so we might want to.
Perhaps that was, yeah, I will
Maybe
correct
we
that.
want to
Thank
double
you.
check on that figure. So give us I guess we've got 4 categories here.
Mm-hmm.
Give us the category for each one, and tell us what they currently have and what we're going to.
Certainly. Well, today, if you're a first responder, there's nothing. Nothing exists in the law. However, currently, if you look at a disabled veteran, this begins on the second page of the bill on line 17. It outlines what was there before, which was up to a $32,500 maximum amount that could be granted for the assessed value off of their home. This would lift that and take it to.
That's for a fully disabled.
That is correct, and there was really nothing else there. This would then change that completely and take this again to based on the specific percentage of what they've been disabled for as off of their property tax.
Okay, so they would go from a 32,000 to I guess an unlimited
Potentially.
fully disabled veteran.
Correct.
Okay, and then a partially disabled veteran.
It would be based totally on the percentage. So if they're 25% disabled, it would be 25% off.
Where's that language?
If you scan. Okay. Okay, if you go down to starting on line 45, section B. Line 45 on page 3, subsection B, each partially disabled veteran is granted exemption on his or her homestead which such veteran owns and occupies as a residence homestead in an amount equal to the percentage of the veteran's disability multiplied by the assessed value of the homestead. And the same exact language repeats for a first responder. So it's pretty easy math.
So then, yeah, let me get him to go through the 4 categories here. So then you've got unlimited for, going from 32,000 unlimited for fully disabled, and then whatever percent they're disabled of veterans here, we're talking about whatever that percent is, that's what they would get, 2550 of their home values. Then go to the first responders.
Correct. So there was nothing that was in code to do this first responders before. And just to let you know, we defined first responder code many years ago, and you'll see that on line 74. That includes a law enforcement officer, firefighter, EMT. It's broken down a couple places in the bill. But this is for our folks that are serving as first responders in our state currently or have retired from the business. But this is how it should actually have to happen on job. It can't happen, years later after they served. This would give them the same exact type of benefit based on the percentage of the disability that they incurred. Then they would have the equal amount offset on their exemption.
Now, a quick, Google and AI are really nice to look at stuff real quick. I think there's 4.6 million current first responders in the U.S. I'm not sure how many that have ever been, but anyway, let's just look at those numbers. So we go from, a fully disabled first responder would get the same full exemption. Is that correct?
First responder never got an exemption before.
I know.
Yeah,
we're
so
going
they would, if
basically
they're
from 0 to full exemption.
if they were 100%.
And then partially disabled first responder would go from 0 to whatever percent.
Exactly.
Disabled, same as the other. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right, now we got some questions. Senator Orrock was, I think, the first one.
Thank you. To the author, the current language, line 17, any disabled veteran. You struck as defined in any paragraphs to this code section. What did that then strike?
Hey, can you bring your mic down?
Oh, I'm sorry.
They're trying to hear online, and
I'm
they're telling me they can't hear you out in the hinterlands.
The hinterlands, yes. But I'm trying to determine whether
Yeah, it's
anybody is disadvantaged by the change in the language if
just look at the bottom of the page, Senator. You'll see that it's
bottom
striking.
of page
See if
4.2
you,
or 4.
yeah, as defined by the paragraph in the code section, we actually strike the old language because it references what was the 32,500. This now changes that in order to give them the amount based on the percentage of their disability.
And you retain, so the language also extends into, in the event of the death of the disabled person.
That
the-
stays, yeah,
so-
that stays the same. So if there's a surviving spouse or minor children of a disabled veteran, that stays the same, that they continue to get the $32,500 maximum amount. That does not change in law. You'll see that beginning on line 27.
27, 28.
Yeah.
And are there's no estimate of the impact. Say, I know there's some counties that have 16% of their population are veterans, just based on a proximity to a base that attracts families and then they stay there. So is it wise to do this without any factual data on how this impacts local the county and local political subdivisions budgets?
Well, I think that if you look again at the total number of people that have served as with first responders or as veterans, and then break down the small percentage of that versus the small percentage of people who are disabled by doing that, I still believe that that amount is de minimis. But even so, I think that our communities can, where will probably be a very small rounding error, do that in support of those who protected and served them for all those years.
All right, we're gonna move on to.
And I just, the only other question was if we are, what we're aware of, how this compares to other states. That you may or may not know the answer.
Okay. I believe Senator Beach was next. Oh, wait a minute, that's that mic that doesn't work, so use the one next to it.
Are you concerned about making sure we don't have any fraud in this kind of program as far as work, you know, is there, besides qualifying for workman's comp, is there any documentation from a physician saying they're 50% disabled or?
Yeah, that's
you know, I mean, I'll just be honest with you. Sometimes I'll be in a parking lot and I'll see somebody parking handicapped. They get up and they run to their appointment and they don't look very handicapped. And you wonder how they got a handicap sticker. You follow me, or a handicap thing in their deal, because they're walking better than I am. So I worry about making sure we don't have any, or we eliminate as much.
That's a great
fraud
question.
as
I'm going to answer
possible.
half of it. I'm going to actually ask Will to answer the other half of it. I'm going to answer the first responder. The reason why we melded this around the workman's comp language is because we have a really tight process in Georgia. In fact, most people have complained it's overly onerous and tight of what they have to go through, doctors, the board, the whole gambit.
Okay.
So that's on that side. But I'm going to let Will, if it's okay, answer your question, Senator Beach, on the military side.
Senator Beach, it's an excellent question, and it is duly asked. To fill you in, to go through the veterans process of receiving a disability claim, they've got to go through a measurable amount of, how do I say this, being looked over by medical doctors and things of that nature. And what happens is they get assigned a certain percentage, and that is through the VA. Now that VA has to provide that veteran with a letter that says you receive this percentage specifically. It's a physical letter. To be able to use this language in such a way that in terms of implementation they would have to provide that tax person with that letter accordingly from the VA's office.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm not sure your light's still on, but Senator Dozal, you had a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, for bringing this bill. I love the concept. I want to clarify. So I understand what Will said relative to the percentage that relates to military. There's also a percentage that is applied to the workers' comp process.
Correct.
I wanted to ask you about line 86. Each partially disabled first responder is granted an exemption on his or her homestead, which he or she owns and occupies as a residence and homestead in an amount equal to 50% of the assessed value of the homestead. Is that different? I thought that what you'd said was that for first responders, it corresponds to the disabled percentage.
It
even
was.
for
I
the-
wonder if we had a Scrivener's error in the change. Thank you for picking that up, Chairman Dolezal. It's on line 86. All right, we're going to confer with the lawyer. Hang on a second. I think it was a miss. Thank you. My error in the clarification. The currently today, we'll give you either a partial or fully under first responders. They do not give a percentage. That was my bad. So they will do 50% for partial and 100% for full.
Okay, so
Yeah.
whatever my percentage is, if it's a percentage less than 100,
Right.
it's 50% homestead
Correct.
exemption essentially, and for 100 is
Right.
100.
Because
okay.
of the limitations. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
All right, I believe Senator Hodges was next.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the bill too. My question was, and I may not be looking at the substitute, but yeah, line 64, shall be the duty of any person allowed an exemption under this code to notify the tax commissioner or receiver of the county of his or her residency in the event such person becomes ineligible. No, they get better. They lose their exemption. Does the reverse also come true? If somebody has a partial disability and they deteriorate and then they have full disability, would your bill cover that also?
That's a great question. Certainly, they could go to the same commissioner and bring an updated form that says that now they are, for whatever purpose happened, medically, et cetera, that they're now 100% disabled. Thank you.
All right, let's see, who was it, Senator? Four here, okay, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Albers, Will. I was going to ask you a question about PTSD related to working in his office, but I figured you already sustained that. But
Could definitely increase the percentage.
But on a more serious note, when just looking at that error on line 82 through 84, it just kind of occurred to me, we do have a growing number of households in America and here at home in Georgia where there may be two veterans in a household, and it says, so each is granted exemption on their homestead which they own. So in a hypothetical, if you have two veterans, both with some level of PTSD, how do we address that, number one? Number two, a lot of folks will go on to some level of disability upon their finishing their contract, and then may, over time, get off of disability. It may not always be a permanent number. So what's the mechanism for addressing that?
A great question. I think actually Senator Hodges in the last part of your question identified that, because if you go up to line 63, they have to notify them if it changes. But I want to ask Legislative Counsel this question, your very first part of your question, to make sure we're clear on that. You want to come? Would you mind if we got her to speak, Mr. Chairman?
Sit right here if you want to.
The first part of your question was about if a house has two disabled veterans or disabled first responders. I believe that if there are two totally disabled first responders, it would be a 100% exemption. And if there were two partially disabled first responders, it would be a 100% exemption, because the two 50% exemptions would be combined.
Mhm. And then, so Senator Hodges' question was about if they worsen, right? And I guess the inverse is true if they improve. So I guess it's a question of both on that. In our Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, we've heard a tremendous amount of testimony, especially in the study committee this past year, about third-party organizations that work on behalf of veterans to get them greater degrees of disability. Obviously, there's nothing about that in this, but certainly I think people that have some level of disability, if they have an opportunity to increase it, they could. So the fact that there's not a state impact, would there be the potential of a disproportionate number of people seeking this in military communities where military personnel do tend to retire more often? For example, around a large Army base, for example, in Middle Georgia, or a naval base on the coast.
Yes, exactly. I think that's where Senator O'Rourke was going as well. And first, Senator Still, thank you for your service. Certainly, where there's a higher degree of military population, there would be a higher degree of folks that would fall into that bucket. I think their community is so much better off for them being there already for all the things they're doing. That's rather extraordinary. And I'll add to that, right now, in positions we're trying to fill around the state, whether it be state police, DNR, corrections, et cetera, we actually we spent our budget dollars in specifically marketing veterans, because they tend to bring that type of training, discipline, responsibility that we need. However, because the housing costs have gone so crazy and inflation has been so high over the last several years, a lot of them are unable to either stay in or purchase their own home. So I believe this will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the difference between someone renting and someone buying a home is extraordinary for what they do for a community, because if someone buys a home, they lay down roots. They tend to be a huge input and favor all the things that are happening in their community, whether it be volunteering, helping out through work, sales taxes they pay, all the other things they're going to do. So again, I believe it'll come full circle.
Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions. One is, have you been able to tap into the license plate data? Because I believe there are license plates for disabled veterans, and maybe that could give us an idea of how many. I mean, it's not everyone, right? But at least understand what the number is or could be. And then the second question is, it says line 76 and other places, partial permanent disability suffered in the line of duty. Is there a way through disability payments or through the processing to confirm that to the senator from the 21st question? How do we assure that there's no fraud in that respect?
That's a great question. First one, I do not know off the top of my head the license plate data. I'm sure my friends in the Department of Revenue might be able to get that for us, but maybe not off the cuff. Getting back to fraud, always a concern. I think we're all good fiscal stewards there. Again, on the state side, if anything, our workman's compensation team has been probably more difficult to deal with. I love and respect the work that they do, but most people only complain that it's so onerous sometimes that they think that the people who truly are deserving this can't get their benefits sometimes. And as far as the military is concerned, I'm not sure if you heard the testimony from Will Spencer here to my side, but there is a detailed process through the VA they have to go through and see a myriad of doctors, et cetera, or tie all those things together to confirm if they truly did have the incident, which again, in their active duty usually happens at that point.
Yes, and sorry, but I very much understand and appreciate from the veteran's perspective. From my perspective, I was trying to figure out from first responders perspective, is there a similar process? Because yes, for veterans, it's very much an outlined process, the federal and state level, but is there a similar one at the state? Or is there a similar one for first responders?
Yeah, so maybe give you a use case that would be helpful. Let's say a law enforcement officer is working a car wreck and someone crashes in behind him, which has sadly happened too often, and he or she is now sent to the hospital. They will go to the hospital, a complete report will be written up for that. It'll work with the local city or county or state's human resources department. Depending on what the next step is, they, if it goes long enough, they'll go work with Workman's Comp. They'll have to submit all that paperwork to Workman's Comp. Oftentimes, Workman's Comp will actually have to pull in another set of doctors. Sometimes they'll even have to go to other appointments to pull it through, and then they'll have to make an assessment whether they do or do not qualify for a disability based on that analysis. It's pretty comprehensive. Again, I think we've only been accused of probably not being kind enough in that process, perhaps, over the years. User-friendly, very good answer.
All right, I don't see any other questions. I don't know that I've got a good handle on this yet, and I'm not sure that we got all the research done on this. I mean, if the committee wants, we can go ahead and move on this, but we could get the Department of Veterans Affairs or something to say, if you've got 16% in the military base, that doesn't mean all 16% of them are disabled.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily that number, but I don't know what that number is. So I'm willing to let this move on if y'all want to, or if we need more data, we can do that too. I'll just say that's the pleasure of the committee at this point. Cool.
I move to pass.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to pass. And I know we'll have some opportunities down the line to continue to look at this. All right, we've got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. All right, looks like it's unanimous. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That was the last item for the day.
It's easy to spend other folks' money, isn't it?
That was all right. Well, you got to turn your light on if you want to do that, but